I'd like to teach a different technique for finding sources using filters. And remember, our sources are used to give enough evidence to fill out all this information in the vitals area, but also to add any spouses, children, parents, or siblings. In order to jump into the sources under search records, we're going to be clicking on Family Search. Now, I previously gave a video over here on how to use fields by adding fields, by deleting fields, to determine which sources the computer comes back with. But this time I want us to scroll down here to the place that says filter your results by, and all of these are filters. In order to make these filters work at their strongest point, we're going to delete the information that by default was carried over when I clicked on Family Search. So I'll delete it and then exit out of this just so it's more clear for what we're looking at. And now I just have a name. I want you to notice how there's over 19,000 results that came back with the computer by default putting all that information in. But now let's watch what happens as I change some of this. We're going to change her maiden name to her married name because I feel like it's a lot easier to find the records that occurred later in that person's life than near their birth. And so we're going to start with her married name and try to find anything to do with her death and down to her birth. From here, I will scroll down and I'm going to click on Update, and I want you to see how this number just goes wild. Over 2 million hits just off her name. And now we're ready to use filters. When I come down here to the filter area, this first one, if I were to click on Type, watch what happens. It opens up the Collections area. So remember in my previous video, Collections, I can get to it this way, or I can get to it by clicking on Type. I really prefer to use it up here than down below because it's easier the other way. So, okay, let's go start with the death place. I click on it and it brings up this little box that allows me to come down and say, all right, I know she came from the United States, so I'm going to click on United States, and by default it jumps me back up the page, which is kind of a pain, but oh well, we'll go back down here. And then it's going to say, all right, there's an arrow, I can filter down even more. This time I know she lived in Virginia, and you can see up above, if you were to look at her birth and death, she stayed in Virginia her whole life, it appears anyways. So I will be clicking on Virginia, and when I do that, you can now see that there's a little over 3,000 records that pertain to her name. So I will scroll back down and we'll start to filter even more. As long as there's an arrow, I can continue to filter down. All right, so this time we're going to go pick the county that she came from, and this is telling me there's 41 records that pertain to this name within that county. So when I look at that, my top hit now becomes her death record, and I can tell that really easily because her parents' names are sitting right here plus her husband. And so how wonderful is that? By just using filters, I was able to filter down to that particular source. Now I can also come down here and I can see that her Find a Grave index sits down here. And how far down was that? 1, 2, 3, 4. It was the 5th one down. Now, different ways to move your sources up to the top so we don't have to scroll down very far. Now, I can't filter down anymore because there's no arrow, but I could use the death year, and she died in 1961, so I can say, all right, let's just do 1900, and that is only 26 hits. So you can see 26 results, and that actually moved her up to the 4th position, which I prefer all of my sources to be at the top 5 just because I don't like looking down the page. So that's a fun way to use filters. I could also filter by her birth year at the same time. She was born in the 1800s, which then brings me down to 19 hits, and that even can make it more clear for me. All right, so that's how we use it for the death. Let's go try it for census records. So we're going to exit out of these different filters. If I come over here and there's an X, that just clears it all out for me. And I may have to do that. Let's see if we can start at the top with America and get rid of all of it. Yes, we can. Okay, we'll exit out of that and start all over. So once again, we just have a name. And now we're going to come down here, and for census records, we're going to go for residence place. So when I click on that, we will scroll down to the United States of America, there's quite a few results that came back here. So we want that number lower. Who is going to spend that much time going through that many records? So let's scroll back down and we will click on the arrow. And now this time we'll scroll down to the state, which is Virginia. And there's only 15,000, which is a lot better than before, but still it's way too many. So now let's see if we can filter down even further and go to the actual county. So of course, when you're using filters, a lot of times you're going to have to know more specifics about where they came from, but at least we're now down to 220 by using just her name and filters. Now this top hit is her 1940 census, and so that's nice that that came in with just the filters we used. But if I even want to go more, at this point I can't go deeper than Pennsylvania because that's all it offered me. I can actually go by years, and I can tell it, okay, you know what, I'm looking for census records only in the 1900s, so let's take those results down to 150. But you can see that I'm still not pulling in her different censuses. Yeah, I've got the 1940, but I know she was in more. So I'm kind of curious to know what happens. Did she go by just Mary or did she go by Ella? If I start playing around, so it already searched for Mary by default with that name first. Let's go for Ella and go update this and see if it brings anything back for me. And it actually brought back the 1930 census because we see her mom living with her. And it also brought me back the 1920. So that's wonderful. Now, how would I go look for a specific record that, like right now, I don't have the 1910 of her? Well, I do remember that she got married in 1910, so she might possibly have not even had her married name yet during that census time. So I would actually try to go back to her maiden name to see if I could go find that 1910 census. So when I click on that, actually it's the 1, 2, 3, the fourth hit down gave me, or the fifth hit down gave me that 1910 census, which is hers. So you can see that as I click on the arrows, I can filter down places, or if I choose I don't want that anymore, I can just click on the X and it deletes that particular filter for me. But this has helped me a lot to use filters when I'm trying to find census records, and oftentimes I can tell the name got indexed incorrectly because it was a hard name in the first place, but the writing made it even harder to determine what that last name was. So oftentimes I will literally delete that last name completely and just go for first names. Sometimes I'll even delete both the first name and last name and just use my filters. As long as I have a really good idea of where they came from and the year that I'm looking for, I've come back with some amazing results and found exactly what I was looking for. So this is just one other technique of how to find sources.